We shall start, ma.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So good evening to all my seniors and my colleagues. Today we'll be discussing about approach to a patient with heart murmurs. So basically, I would like to begin with a little on the basics of auscultation. So this is something which we know, but we usually overlook. So the first thing that we need to remember is whenever we are doing either a detailed cardiovascular system examination, or if you're the primary pathologist in some other system and we're just examining the cardiovascular system, either way, one of the most common things or basic things which we do is auscultating the heart. So what we need to remember is, in addition to auscultating the precordium with the diaphragm, we should also auscultate using the bell. This is because the bell is the one which will pick up low frequency heart sounds and murmurs, whereas the diaphragm only picks up high frequency heart sounds and murmurs. And one more thing which we need to remember is whenever we are using the bell, we need to place the bell with the lightest possible contact pressure. As in, we need to place it very lightly over the chest. This is because if you place it very firmly or with firm pressure over the precordium, what happens is the you stretch the skin, and that stretched skin itself will act as a diaphragm, and therefore again what you'll be hearing is high frequency sounds, and you'll not be able to pick up any low frequency heart sounds. So that's the first thing that you need to remember. The second thing which we all usually do is the four traditional areas of auscultation that we all know is the mitral area, the tricuspid area, the pulmonic, and the aortic area. In addition to this, there are two other areas which we over the precordium, which we should also try to regularly include while we are auscultating, and that includes the Erb's area as well as Gibson's area. So Erb's area is the left third intercostal space. And here the murmur that we can usually pick up here is most commonly the pansystolic murmur of a ventricular septal defect. As you can see, the ventricular septum is almost just behind the Erb's point. So if you auscultate the Erb's point, you'll be able to pick up a pansystolic murmur of VSD. Similarly, the other area is Gibson's area. Gibson's area is left first intercostal space. So that is just about the pulmonic area. So here you'll be able to pick up the continuous murmur of PDA can also be heard here. So these are two areas which, in addition to the routine four areas that we auscultate, should be auscultated over the precordium. And then, apart from auscultating the precordium, there are a few other areas as well which we should regularly auscultate. So these include the right anterior chest. That is only if you're suspecting a dextrocardia, you should also auscultate the right part of the precordium. Similarly, the other sites that we should auscultate are the axilla. That is mainly if you pick up a murmur in the mitral area, especially a murmur of mitral regurgitation, will be radiating to the axilla. So you should auscultate the axilla as well. Similarly, the next area is your carotid. So whenever there is an aortic valve disease, the murmur will be radiating to the carotid. So we should also auscultate the carotid. Then around the clavicle, supra and intraclavicular areas should be auscultated because PDA murmurs can be radiating there. And the fifth area is your epigastrium. So sometimes the murmur of a tricuspid regurgitation, especially if there is an emphysematous lung, will be pushed down, and you might be able to hear it in the epigastrium. And finally, peripheral arteries, like especially the femoral artery, where you know that there is a murmur called the de Rosier's murmur, which in AR. So if you can pick up those murmurs if you keep in mind to auscultate the peripheral arteries like femoral artery. And finally, you tell the patient to turn and you auscultate uh, in the back. In back, the main areas that you need to auscultate are the interscapular area and the spine and your infrascapular area. So in the interscapular area, if there is any murmurs because of coarctation of aorta or any aortic aneurysm, you might be able to identify those. Similarly, in the infrascapular area, if there are any collateral circulations which have been developed, then those bruits can be picked up. Then coming to the positions. So we usually just auscultate the patient in supine position. But however, if you're suspecting a strong cardiac pathology, it's always better to auscultate the patient in at least three positions. The first one being the left lateral decubitus position. So logically, what happens is when you ask the patient to lie down, turn little to the left lateral position, the apex comes closer to the chest wall, and hence the murmurs of mitral atrium will be better heard. And similarly, if you put the patient in the supine position, or more specifically speaking, if the patient, you ask the patient to move a little to the right side, murmurs of tricuspid area will be heard better. And in the sitting and leaning forward position, the base of the heart falls forward. So again, the aortic and pulmonary area murmurs will be heard better. So that's the basics of auscultation. So apart from the routine auscultation that we do, there's a few things which we tend to miss and need to keep in mind and try to include that while we are auscultating the heart. So whenever we are auscultating, what we're mainly looking for are heart sounds, any added sounds, and murmurs. So today I'll just be focusing on murmurs. So basically, what is a murmur? Anything for sound to be produced, you require vibrations. So therefore, murmur is nothing but audible vibrations that vary in its intensity, quality, and frequency. And this happens, so this murmur is produced because there's a problem in either of the three. That is, if there's a problem in the blood flow, or there's a problem or a difference in the orifice through which it's passing, or if there is a problem into the vessel into which or the chamber into which it's entering. The meaning, suppose if the blood flow is accelerated or there is an increased turbulence in the blood flow, then a murmur can be generated. Or the flow is normal, but the orifice which is passing is narrow. That's the valvular orifice is either narrowed or is irregular. Then again, a murmur will be generated. Or if the vessel or the chamber into which it's entering is dilated, then again a murmur is produced. In addition to this, if there is a backward flow, either through an incompetent valve or through a VSD or PDA, again a murmur will be produced. So a little into theory onto how all of these factors which I just mentioned ultimately produce a murmur is, like as I previously said, because of a high velocity flow, or because of a small orifice diameter, or because of low kinetic viscosity. So basically, we know that in conditions like polycythemia, since the cellular mass is more, the viscosity of blood is high. Similarly, in conditions like anemia, the blood basically speaking will tend to be more watery. So therefore, it will be more, the chance of turbulence is high. So because of these three factors, ultimately turbulence is produced. So, and then a little into fluid dynamics, what happens is because of these turbulence, there are a few things which happen. For example, something called as jet impact. So, jet impact is nothing but when a high velocity jet of blood will come and hit the vessel wall or the chamber wall. It sets the vessel wall or chamber wall into vibrations, and it is these vibrations that we perceive as murmurs. The second concept is something called as cavitation. So what is cavitation is, we have all been to beaches, and we've seen that in the seashore, you'll be able to see at the end of the wave, you'll have froth. So just like that, here, when a high velocity turbulent blood is flowing, micro bubbles will be generated. And these micro bubbles is what they term as cavitations. And these cavitations in turn will generate sound of different frequencies, and we perceive that as a murmur. The third concept is vortex shedding. So vortex is nothing but a whirlpool of water, or whirlpool in a simple, like as you can see in the top right corner. So what happens is when blood flows through a narrowed orifice, this whirlpool or a vortex is generated, and it gradually grows laterally. And this will go and in turn again hit the vessel wall, and that in turn will again generate a murmur. Then eddy formation. So eddy currents are basically what happens is this turbulent blood flow in turn will cause eddy currents in the adjacent slow moving blood. So that slow moving blood in turn will be set into vibrations, which in turn will be perceived as a murmur. Then there's another concept called flitter. What happens is, this is based on Bernoulli's principle. So what happens is whenever a high velocity of blood flows through a vessel, the vessel wall will be pulled inwards. So now as the velocity of blood keeps varying, the degree to which the vessel wall is pulled inwards will also vary. So therefore, it's something like the vessel wall will be set into vibration, and these vibrations will again generate a murmur. And finally, the last concept is periodic wake phenomenon. So here, what happens is, whenever, like for example, whenever a stone is placed in the path of water, what happens is the water tends to move around it, right? So as water tends to move around it, there'll be ripples generated in the water. So this is the same thing here. Whenever there is an obstruction or in the path of blood, the blood tries to move around it, and that in turn will set in vibration, which in turn is picked up as a murmur. So this is like completely theoretical. So now let's assume that you auscultated the patient, you auscultated all the areas, you put the patient in different positions, and you picked up a murmur. Now the next question is to figure out, should you be worried about it? Do you think that all murmurs are pathological? All murmurs happen because of an underlying cardiac abnormality? So the answer is no. Simply put, all diastolic murmurs, all murmurs associated with thrill, and all pansystolic murmurs are pathological murmurs. So this leaves us with, so now whenever you're auscultating and you pick up a diastolic murmur or you pick up a murmur with thrill, or if it's a pansystolic murmur, then you're definitely sure that there is some underlying cardiac pathology or there is a disease condition which has resulted in this murmur. However, whenever you see here an early systolic murmur or an ejection systolic murmur, also known as a mid diastolic murmur, that's when the question arises, because there are certain conditions where such murmurs are set in even without any underlying cardiac abnormality. So whenever you hear an early systolic murmur or an ejection systolic murmur, there are few other things which you need to look into before you decide for further cardiac evaluation. The first thing is, suppose if that murmur which you just picked up is an incidental finding, that is, the patient does not have any cardiac related symptoms. Secondly, there is no other added sounds. It is not associated with any thrill, and the murmur is very short, soft murmur with no radiation. Then it is leaning more towards an innocent murmur. Means you don't require any further cardiac evaluation for such murmurs. Okay, so now you figured out whether the murmur needs to be evaluated further or not. So now you've decided that it's a pathological murmur. So the next thing is, you have to clinically, based on certain parameters, you can more or less diagnose or come to a conclusion onto what the underlying etiological factor. So for this, there are few parameters under which you can describe a murmur. The first thing that you need to see is the timing of the murmur. And by timing, I mean the timing of the murmur with respect to the cardiac cycle. That is, in which phase of the cardiac cycle is the murmur occurring. That is, whether it is a systolic murmur or whether it's a diastolic murmur. The next you need to do is identify the location of the murmur. And by location, I mean, where is the murmur maximally heard, or where is the murmur heard the loudest over the precordium. Third is the location of the murmur Third is the duration. Fourth is the intensity, then frequency. Am I audible?
Continue.
Abhi, continue.
Okay. So a little into the cardiac cycle. So briefly, we know that the first heart sound is produced because of the closure of the atrioventricular valve. So once the AV valves close, that's when the ventricular systole begins. And as the ventricular systole will continue, and once systole, at the end of systole, what happens is the semilunar valve will close, and that is marked by the second heart sound. So therefore, any murmur heard between the first heart sound and the second heart sound is considered a systolic murmur. And the murmur which is heard between the second heart sound and the subsequent first heart sound is considered to be a diastolic murmur. So therefore, these systolic and diastolic murmurs can further be, one more thing that you need to keep in mind is sometimes, so this you can accurately decide if it's a systolic or a diastolic murmur only if you know which is S1 and which is S2. But sometimes it will be difficult to figure out which is S1 and S2. So in these conditions, these times, what you can do is you can simultaneously palpate the carotid. So the murmur which accompanies the upstroke of the carotid pulse will be your systolic murmur, and the other will be your diastolic murmur. And secondly, but suppose if the patient is in tachycardia, then you'll not be able to figure out which is coinciding with the carotid upstroke. So what you can do in these conditions is you can try carotid sinus pressure and try if the heart rate reduces, then you can figure out if it's a systolic or a diastolic murmur. But if that is not possible, then we can do something called as the inching technique of Harvey and Levy. So what is this inching technique? It's something which we usually do. So what we do is we basically have to start from one end of the precordium, either from the apex or from the base. So for example, if you're starting from the aortic area, we know that in the aortic area, S2 will be louder than S1. So from the aortic area, you can gradually inch downward towards the base, towards the apex along the precordium, and you'll be able to figure out which is S1 and S2. And based on that, you can understand which is the systolic murmur and which is the diastolic murmur. And then, so if the murmur is present between S1 and S2, it's a systolic murmur. Between S2 and S1 is a diastolic murmur. If the murmur begins in systole, continues through S2 and enters or ends in diastole, it is a continuous murmur. And then, okay, and further, depending on, that's the first thing. So now once you need to figure out if it's a systolic or a diastolic murmur. Now, once you figure that out, the next thing you need to do is determine the duration of the murmur, which means that during how long the murmur is present in systole. Based on that, you can classify systolic murmurs again into early systolic, mid systolic, late systolic, and pansystolic murmurs. And diastolic murmurs can be classified into early, mid, and late diastolic murmurs. So that's what I meant, duration. Now, what are the factors which determine the duration of a murmur? Is basically, so see, some murmurs, we say some murmurs are early systolic, which means that they're present only during the early part of systole, and after that, they're not present. So this is the one thing that you need to keep in mind is blood flows only as long as there is a pressure gradient between the two sides. So once the pressure gradient is abolished, that means the pressure is equalized on both the sides, blood flow will stop, murmur will stop. And therefore, this duration of a murmur reflects the severity of the disease in stenotic lesion and not in regurgitant lesion, which means that, for example, if the stenosis is more severe, it will take a longer time for blood to move across that stenotic valve. So longer the duration of the murmur, therefore indicates that it is the stenosis is more severe. But that kind of relation will not be is not true in case of a regurgitant lesion. Then, so first thing is the timing. Second is your duration. Third is your configuration. So what is configuration? Is basically you're going to note the how the intensity of the murmur is varying. If the intensity of the murmur is increasing, it is considered to be a crescendo configuration. But suppose if it is decreasing, it is a decrescendo configuration. Then you have it can increase in intensity and then decrease in intensity, and that is called as a crescendo decrescendo murmur or a diamond shaped murmur. Or sometimes the configuration of the murmur, the sound of the murmur will remain the same throughout, and that is called as a plateau murmur. So these are the four things that you need to keep in mind. So I'll just quickly brush into the detail, into the causes of each type of murmur. I'm sure most of us are aware of it. I'll just revise it. So the first thing is early systolic murmur. So an early systolic murmur is a murmur which begins with S1 and will end well before S2. Okay, and so the causes of an early systolic murmur are acute severe forms of MR and TR. We know that in chronic MR and TR, you actually have a pansystolic murmur. But why is it that in acute MR, the murmur is present only in the initial part of systole and then it's not present? So the reason for this is what happens is in acute MR, it's an acute condition. So the atria are not yet what do I say, compliant to receive that large amount of blood which is getting regurgitated, it's regurgitating from the ventricle. So you basically have a non-compliant left atrium. And into this non-compliant left atrium, a large amount of blood is entering. And since the ventricle atrium is not compliant, its volume will not increase with increasing blood. Therefore, the pressure will increase fast. The pressure gradient or the pressure between the left ventricle and the left atrium will equalize faster. So that is why so blood will flow only for the initial part of systole, and since the left atrium is non-compliant, it is a stiff left atrium. The pressure will rise fast and it will equalize quickly, and that is why only during the early part of systole we'll have a murmur. Secondly, in the muscular forms of VSD, the most common type are membranous types of VSD, but in muscular type of VSD, you actually hear an early systolic murmur. So the reason for this is because what happens is as the ventricles contract, in the muscular VSD, due to septal contraction, what happens is the VSD will close. So initially you will have blood flow across the septal defect, but gradually because of contraction, the septal defect will close. So once it closes, there will be no further blood flow, and hence the murmur will not be heard. Next, coming to mid-systolic murmurs. So mid-systolic murmurs are those murmurs which will be heard after S1. So you'll have S1, usually you'll have a clear interval, and then you'll have an ejection click. Most commonly, you'll have an ejection click, and following this ejection click, you will hear a murmur. So that ends at S2. So that is an mid-systolic murmur, which is also called as an ejection systolic murmur. So all forms of obstructive valvular diseases at the level of semilunar valve will result in a mid-systolic or ejection systolic murmur, be it a supravalvular, valvular, or a subvalvular obstruction. So all conditions like aortic stenosis, aortic sclerosis, all of these, just like PS, all of that will ultimately result in ejection systolic murmur. Or secondly, if there is a high flow, there's a high velocity or high volume of blood flow across these valves, will also result in an ejection systolic murmur, which is seen in case of hyperdynamic circulation. And one thing which you need to keep in mind when you're thinking about ejection systolic murmurs is that, as I mentioned earlier, is these ejection systolic murmurs can be a innocent murmur. So whenever you auscultate an early systolic or an ejection systolic murmurs, you need to make sure that it is not a innocent murmur and it is actually a pathological murmur if you want to further evaluate. So, so what happens is you can have an innocent ejection systolic murmur in both the aortic as well as the pulmonary area. So in the aortic, the mid-systolic murmur, which you hear in the aortic area, which is an innocent murmur, is called as Still's murmur. And these innocent murmurs are actually more commonly seen in children, and they'll disappear once they grow into adulthood. And the reason, and similarly, even in a pulmonary, even in the pulmonary area, you'll be able to hear an ejection systolic murmur, and that is just called as a pulmonary flow murmur. The reason why there are many theories as to why innocent murmurs are generated. So one of the most accepted concept is that the ascending aorta will be small. The ascending aorta's diameter will be small in childhood. So when a large amount of blood is flowing through the small ascending aortic diameter, a murmur is generated, and gradually as the child grows, the aortic diameter will increase and the murmur disappears. Similarly, you might even be able to hear venous hums. So venous hum is again a continuous low-pitched murmur. It's a continuous murmur. It's not a systolic murmur, but rather a continuous murmur, which is heard, which is seen in the neck, lateral to the sternocleidomastoid, and that is again considered as a innocent murmur. So as I said, mid-systolic murmurs are those murmurs which begin after S1. You have a clear interval, afterward usually crescendo, decrescendo configuration or shape of a murmur, and it ends at S2. Then coming to and one more thing that I wanted to say here is in mid-systolic murmur is in aortic sclerosis, you have a phenomenon or called as Galois-Walden's dissociation. So what happens here is you will hear sometimes in aortic sclerosis, you'll be able to hear two mid-systolic murmurs. So what that is called as Galois-Walden's dissociation. Now, why does this happen is, what happens is because in a imagine usually in elderly patients having a calcified aortic valve. So what happens here is, initially there will be where two murmurs will be heard. First mechanism is what happens is there'll be blood flow. When blood flows across this sclerosed valve, it will become turbulent, and this turbulent blood will go and hit the aortic root, and that in turn will generate a medium pitched murmur. That's the first murmur which you will hear. Secondly, what will happen is, as I previously told, something called as a periodic wake phenomenon. So what happens is when blood flows across this sclerosed valve, blood will change direction. So it will go hit the sclerosed valve and it will come back. It will come back towards the apex. So so once it moves towards the apex, you'll be able to hear a high frequency vibration, and these high frequency vibrations will be perceived as a musical murmur. So these two mid-systolic murmurs that you hear in aortic sclerosis is called as Gallivardin's dissociation. So the next thing is a late systolic murmur. So a late systolic murmur means the murmur is seen in the later part of systole and will end before S2. And this is more or less always seen in mitral valve prolapse. So why is it so? Why is it only seen in the later part of systole? Initially, when systole begins, the left ventricular volume is high, and the ventricular as ventricular systole occurs, the pressure is also high. So the mitral cusp, which does not have any support, which is initially prolapsed, will not fall because of the increased pressure in the left ventricle. But gradually, as systole occurs, the left ventricle empties into the aorta, the left ventricular volume and pressure will fall. And when that happens, there is nothing supporting the mitral valve. So the mitral valve will prolapse. So once the mitral valve prolapses, which is seen in the later part of systole when the left ventricle volume is reduced, only then will blood start regurgitating into the atria. So that is when the murmur will be heard. So that is why you have a late systolic murmur in cases of mitral valve prolapse. Then coming to a hollow systolic murmur, also called as a pansystolic murmur. So this murmur begins in at S1, is usually has a plateau configuration and ends at S2. And the three conditions where you see a pansystolic murmur are MR, chronic MR, TR, and VSD. And obviously, this is easy to identify. So you will not really get mixed up with to identify the cause of these pansystolic murmur, because an MR is best heard in the mitral area, TR in the tricuspid area, and VSD in Earth's area. And the other thing is, MR, as I previously told, will radiate to the axilla, but TR and VSD has no specific radiation site. Similarly, VSD will be associated with thrill, but MR and TR will not have any thrill. And as I will mention later about dynamic auscultation, there are few changes which will happen to our heart sounds as well as murmurs with respiration. So here, but we do know that right-sided murmurs will increase with inspiration. So therefore, TR murmur will appear louder in inspiration. So that's how we can differentiate between the three causes of systolic murmur. Then coming to diastolic murmur. So first is an early diastolic murmur. So early diastolic murmurs are those murmurs which begin at S2. They usually have a decrescendo pattern and will end before the next S1. So this early diastolic murmurs are usually seen in regurgitant lesions of the semilunar valve, that is an AR as well as PR. And the named murmur that you have to remember here is Graham-Steele's murmur, which is basically a high-pitched early diastolic murmur, which is seen in pulmonary regurgitation. Then mid-diastolic murmur. So a mid-diastolic murmur is the murmur which begins after S2. There is a clear interval after S2, and then you'll hear an opening snap. Following the opening snap, you'll hear a murmur which extends up to the next S1, and that is a mid-diastolic murmur. And these mid-diastolic murmurs are seen in stenotic lesions of the AV valves, that is MS and TS. And along with that, also any form of basically any obstruction to the blood flow from atria to ventricle. So these can also be because of a left or right atrial tumor, like myxoma. And the named murmurs that you need to remember here are Carrie-Combs murmur and Austin-Flint's murmur. So what is the Carrie-Combs murmur is basically the mid-diastolic murmur that is seen in mitral stenosis, whereas Austin-Flint's murmur is the mid-diastolic murmur that is seen in aortic regurgitation. So how do I differentiate between the two? Is first thing is obviously in mitral stenosis, since the valve is stenotic, you will hear an opening snap which accompanies the murmur, but that will not be present in AR. The second thing is Carrie-Combs murmur will usually be associated with a diastolic thrill, but Austin-Flint murmur will not have a thrill. Third thing is Carrie-Combs murmur is seen specifically in acute traumatic fever, whereas Austin-Flint murmur is because of severe AR. And Carrie-Combs murmur, since there's mitral stenosis, the patient will have other symptoms of pulmonary hypertension, which will not be present in aortic regurgitation. Okay, now finally coming to continuous murmurs. Now continuous murmurs are those murmurs which begin in S1, they pass through S2 and they will end in diastole. So whenever you come across a continuous murmur, so the causes of a continuous murmur can broadly be classified into three. The first cause is whenever there is a shunt between a high pressure to a low pressure system. In simple terms, whenever there is a shunting between the systemic circulation and the pulmonary circulation, irrespective of whether it is systole or diastole, the pressure on the left side will always be higher in both phases of the cardiac cycle than the right side. So therefore, during systole as well as diastole, there will be blood flow through these shunts, and hence you'll have a continuous murmur. Example that is the first cause, that's high to low pressure shunt. So examples are any flow shunting between the systemic artery to the pulmonary artery. So this includes patent ductus arteriosus, truncus arteriosus, or after some shunting procedures like Blalock-Taussig shunt, which we do. Or it can be because of anomalous left coronary artery arising from pulmonary artery, or it can be because of other conditions like Luttenbacher syndrome, where you have ASD along with mitral stenosis. So because of the mitral stenosis, blood will not be able to enter the left ventricle. Rather, all the blood from the left atrium through the ASD will enter the right atrium. That's the first reason. Second reason is whenever there is a rapid blood flow. If there is a rapid blood flow during systole as well as diastole, the blood will be rapid, the blood will be turbulent. So therefore, you will be able to hear a murmur. So this is like, for example, the Mamdi souffle and hyperthyroidism, hemangioma, or highly vascular tumors like hepatoma, renal cell carcinoma. In all of these conditions, because of the increased vascularity and increased blood flow, you'll be able to hear a continuous murmur, irrespective of the cardiac cycle. Third is if you have a localized arterial obstruction, like for example in coarctation of aorta or any form of obstruction in the artery, again a murmur will be generated and that will be present throughout systole as well as diastole. Okay, so the first thing that you did was you identify the timing of the murmur, then you identify the duration of the murmur, then you focused on the configuration of the murmur. Using these three, you somehow came to like corner down the etiology. The next thing that you need to know is localize the murmur. So usually when a murmur is heard, it will be heard all over the precordium. So what you need to do is you have to identify where the murmur is heard the loudest, which area is the murmur heard the best. So that is the location of the murmur. That is the primary site of origin of the murmur. So obviously, if murmur is heard best in a particular area, then the lesion will be more or less around that. That is in the mitral area. It will usually be an MS or MR. So in tricuspid, aortic, and pulmonary area. And in Erb's area, as I previously told, VSD murmurs will be better heard here. So we need to localize the site of murmur. The next thing that we have to do is grade the intensity of the murmur, or which is nothing but the loudness of the murmur. So we have Freeman and Levine's grading. So there are 6 grades, and grade 4 and above means if a murmur is associated with thrill, it is immediately grade 4 and above. Grade 1 is a very faint murmur which can be heard only with special effort under optimal conditions. That is like you should have close concentration and it should be a very quiet room, and only then you'll be able to pick up the murmur. Grade 2 murmurs are soft murmurs, but they are easily audible. Grade 3 murmurs are loud, but they don't have thrill. The minute a murmur is associated with thrill, it by default becomes grade 4 and above. Now, if that murmur can be heard only when the stet is completely placed over the chest wall, it is grade 4. But suppose a murmur, if the thrill is present and the murmur can be heard with the stet, only the edge of the stet touching the precordium, it is grade 5. And suppose the murmur is heard with the chest stet held off the chest wall, slightly above the chest wall, then like, without any contact with the chest wall, it is grade 6. And also, I told you any murmur with associated with thrill is a pathological murmur. The next thing is you have to like describe the murmur in terms of frequency. That is whether you should just see if it's a high pitched murmur or a low pitched murmur. So usually this high pitched murmur is, it depends upon the pressure gradient. So the more is the pressure gradient, the velocity will be more and it will be a high pitched murmur. And if the pressure gradient is lesser, it will be a low pitched murmur. And roughly all regurgitant lesions will have a high pitched murmur and stenotic lesions will be a low pitched murmur. The next is transmission or radiation. You have to look for radiation of sound, radiation of the murmur. So what you need to know is usually these high frequency murmurs will be radiated upstream. Upstream means proximal to the site of origin. Whereas low frequency murmurs will be downstream, means they will be transmitted distal to the site of origin. For example, as I told you previously, in aortic stenosis, there'll be in Galois-Dalton's dissociation, you'll have two murmurs. You'll have a high frequency murmur and a low pitched musical murmur. So this high frequency murmur, what happens is, since it's high frequency, it originates from the aorta, and that will be transmitted upstream. So it will transmit proximally, and that is why you'll be able to pick it up at the apex. The second thing that you need to know is these high frequency murmurs have very poor transmission through thoracic tissue. They don't conduct well through thoracic tissue, and that is why they won't be usually associated with thrill. So high frequency murmurs, though, will not have thrill. However, these low frequency murmurs are conducted well through thoracic tissue, so they are the ones which will be associated with thrill. Finally, coming to dynamic auscultation. So what is dynamic auscultation is basically what we are doing is it's a technique where we alter the circulatory dynamics by some physical or pharmacological maneuvers, and we'll see how the heart sounds or how the murmurs change after these maneuvers. So these dynamic auscultation, these maneuvers can basically be classified into deliberate and non-deliberate maneuvers. Deliberate maneuvers means we are deliberately changing the circulatory dynamics, either by telling the patient to change his position, or that is by some physical procedure, or we give certain pharmacological agents, and we see how the murmurs or the heart sounds change accordingly. But non-deliberately, what happens? For example, if the patient is gone into arrhythmia, or is having some premature ventricular contraction, or the patient is having congenital heart block, complete heart block. Under these conditions, what happens is, non-deliberately the circulatory dynamics is changing, which in turn will affect the heart sounds and murmurs. So now I'll just focus on the changes that happen in murmurs with dynamic auscultation. The first thing is respiration. So what happens is during inspiration, a negative intrathoracic pressure is created, and because of that negative intrathoracic pressure, venous return will increase. So when there is increased venous return, there's increased blood flow across the right side of the heart. There's increased right ventricular stroke volume, and hence all right-sided murmurs will sound loud during inspiration. And the reverse is true in expiration. During expiration, left-sided murmurs will appear loud. That's the first thing. So you have to check. You can check these changes of the murmur intensity during inspiration and expiration. The second maneuver that you can try is Valsalva. So just quickly into the phases of Valsalva. So there are 4 phases of in Valsalva's maneuver. So the first, basically what we do in Valsalva, they ask the patient to expire against a closed glottis for at least 20 to 30 seconds. So phase 1, what happens is that's when the patient starts straining. So what happens is when the patient is expiring against a closed glottis, the intrathoracic pressure rises. So once the intrathoracic pressure suddenly rises, what happens is all the blood which is present in the left ventricle will be pushed out. And that results in a transient rise in the mean arterial pressure. So you can see the graph, it's been plotted from mean arterial pressure and heart rate against time. So in phase 1, there'll be a transient rise in mean arterial pressure, resulting in a corresponding fall in heart rate. Then what in phase 2? Now what happens in phase 2 is the intrathoracic pressure continues to rise. Now as the intrathoracic pressure continues to rise, what happens? The venous return reduces. So once the venous return reduces, the right ventricular stroke volume reduces. As the right ventricular stroke volume reduces, the pulmonary circulation will be less and left ventricular stroke volume will also be less, ultimately resulting in a fall in the mean arterial pressure. So as you can see, the mean arterial pressure has fallen in phase 2. And this results in reflex tachycardia. So the heart rate picks up, increases in phase 2. So during this phase, what happens is, what we see is, in the right side as well as in the left side, in both the sides, the blood flow across the valves is reduced. The volume of blood flow is reduced. And hence, there will be attenuation. That is, the intensity of the murmur will reduce. For all of the right and left-sided valvular diseases, the intensity of murmur will reduce. However, except in HOCM, in HOCM, what happens is, because the mean arterial pressure, the left ventricular volume is reducing, the pressure gradient will increase. And because of the increased pressure gradient, the systolic murmur of HOCM will be accentuated. All other murmurs will be attenuated. Then coming to phase 3. In phase 3, what happens is the phase of release. You tell the patient to stop exhaling. So when that happens, there will be a sudden decrease in the intrathoracic. All the pressure that was built up will suddenly fall. There will be a sudden decrease in intrathoracic pressure, and hence there will be venous return will increase. And this increased venous return will go, and all the blood will pool in the pulmonary vasculature. So the blood in the left side of the heart will be less. So the cardiac output will be less, and the mean arterial pressure will be less. There will be a transient fall in the in the mean arterial pressure. That is what you see in phase 3. And during phase 3, what happens is, since there's increased venous return and increased blood flow through the right side of the heart, right-sided murmurs will appear loud. Finally, coming to phase 4. Now, phase 4 is the overshoot phase. So what happens here is, basically here, all the parameters and all the conditions will return to the pre-Valsalva levels. So all the blood which was pooled in the pulmonary vasculature will now return to the will return to the left ventricle, and along with that, because the sudden fall in blood pressure in phase 3, the baroreceptors will get activated. So both of these will act hand in hand and ultimately result in an increase in the mean arterial pressure, which you can see in phase 4, which in turn is associated with a corresponding reflex bradycardia. So these are the phases of Valsalva and the changes that happen in murmur with Valsalva. The next thing that we need to that we can do for dynamic auscultation is we check the changes in the murmurs as well as the heart sounds by changing the posture of the patient. So first thing that you do is, if a patient is sitting or standing, you ask him to lie down. So when that happens, when you tell him to lie down, what happens is the venous return increases. So it's all the same thing. Whenever, that's the first thing, that when you tell the patient sitting or standing, he goes into supine position. Or secondly, when you tell the patient to squat. So when he squats, the squatting, what will happen? Again, the venous return will increase. Okay. And the third, so in both these conditions, what happens is the venous return increases. So once the venous return increases, the right-sided blood flow will increase, right-side stroke volume increases. After a few cycles, left-sided stroke volume will increase. So therefore, initially you'll have increased, the right-sided murmurs will increase in intensity, followed by left-sided murmurs. But except in case of HOCM, what happens to HOCM murmurs are, since the left-sided stroke volume is increasing, left ventricular volume is increasing, the pressure gradient will fall. And because of the fall in the pressure gradient, the systolic murmur of HOCM will reduce in intensity. So basically, valvular murmurs and murmur because of HOCM will go opposite in direction. That is, their effect with all these maneuvers will be reversed. Then The next thing is isometric hand grip. So what is isometric hand grip? Is you basically ask the patient to make a fist in both his hands and and hold it for around 20 to 30 seconds. When he does that, what happens? The same thing again. Venous, the systemic vascular resistance will increase. So once the systemic vascular resistance increases, the arterial pressure will increase, and that in turn will result in increase in the left ventricular afterload. So that causes the decrease in the fall in the pressure gradient, and again results in fall in the decrease in intensity of the systolic murmur of HOCM. Yeah, so these are the physical maneuvers that we do. Then coming to the pharmacological agents that we use to check the changes in the intensity of murmurs and heart sounds. So routinely what we use is amyl nitrate inhalation. So what we have to do is we take a few gauze pieces, dip it in amyl nitrate, and ask the patient to inhale for around 10 to 15 seconds, around 3 to 4 breaths. So we know all nitrates are vasodilators. So this will result in vasodilation. And because of vasodilation, what will happen is there'll be fall in the systemic vascular resistance. So once the systemic vascular resistance falls, and there'll be a because of the fall in systemic vascular resistance, the cardiac output will be high, and because of the increase in the cardiac output, the systolic murmurs of all these valvular lesions will appear loud. And then, in addition to amyl nitrate, the other drugs that we use that can be used for dynamic auscultation are methoxyamine as well as phenylephrine, and these are basically vasopressor agents, and the effect will be reversed to what happens with amyl nitrate. But since amyl nitrate inhalation is more convenient to use, but these drugs have to be given intravenously, and it's very difficult to alter their dosage, and so therefore they are not routinely used for dynamic auscultation. Lastly, I told you there are sometimes the heart murmurs and heart sounds can vary with non-deliberate factors, and one of them is arrhythmia. So whenever the patient has a premature ventricular complex, or for example, when the patient is having AF, so in these conditions, what happens is usually there'll be a compensatory pause following following a PVC, or sometimes when in an AF and there is a longer cycle. In these conditions, there'll be the ventricular filling will happen for a longer period of time. So there'll be a lot. So the blood in the ventricular volume will increase. So in the next beat, what happens is there'll be augmentation of the ventricular contractility. So there'll be more amount of blood which will be pushed out of the ventricles, and hence the systolic murmurs will be like of the aortic stenosis, pulmonary stenosis will be increased. And it is in this also here what happens is, since the pressure gradient is high here, the systolic murmur of HOCM will also be increased because the left ventricular outflow obstruction will be what do I say? Because the pressure is more, the pressure difference will be more here. And this effect is actually called as Broken-Close-Braunwald sign, which is seen in HOCM, where what happens is whenever the patient develops PVC, what happens is the intensity of the murmur will increase, but because of the obstruction, the pulse volume will be less. So that is called as Broken-Braunwald sign. So finally, so what happened is you did a complete cardiac auscultation and you figured out if the patient is having an innocent murmur or a pathological murmur, and whether the murmur needs to be evaluated further. So once you've picked up a murmur and you decide that the patient is having an underlying cardiac pathology, the next thing that you have to do is echo. So this is a algorithm from Harrison. So it's more or less the same thing as a systolic murmur. I told you early systolic murmurs and mid systolic murmurs or ejection systolic murmurs, you have to rule out whether it's an innocent murmur or not. Similarly, continuous murmur, like as in venous hum and Manley souffle, can again be an innocent murmur. Otherwise, all other murmurs are definitely will have an underlying cardiac pathology. So you will have to rule it out by doing an echo. So the next step is always an echo. And yeah, so you have to do an echo, and apart from usually we do a transthoracic echo, which we usually do. But if you're not able to, if it's inconclusive, you can try transesophageal echo and other imaging studies like cardiac magnetic resonance imaging, CTCA, and all of that can be done. That's it. Thank you.
That was a very excellent and extensive presentation, ma. So
Thank you,
whoever
sir.
wants to congratulate her can congratulate her.
Congratulations.
Thank
don't
you,
know
sir.
which book you prepared, ma? Which book you refer?
I would actually thank my unit seniors, sir, Deepika ma'am, Evangeline ma'am, and Anji sir. They all suggested which books to refer. They sent me material also based on that. Only I did that, sir. They asked me to refer Vijay Raghav Rao, not sure, cardiology book, sir.
Okay.
And along with that, Harrison I used, sir. That's all.
But that was a very good and extensive presentation, ma. You actually read a lot regarding the mechanics and the principles behind it. So we would like to congratulate you for that. So I don't
Thank
have.
you, sir.
So what is the basic between Marmor and a Brui?
Sorry, sir.
Difference between a Marmor and a Brui? Hello.
Not sure, sir. Murmur is heard, picked up from the, I mean, it's murmur, something which originates from the heart. I'm not sure. And bruit is something from the blood vessel.
The Marmor, if you hear it outside the heart, it's a Brui.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay,
basically, the pathology of Marmor can be one is increased flow through a normal vessel, normal orifice, or a normal flow through an abnormal orifice. That is how you basically do it. Okay. So mitral valve collapse syndrome, you will have a mid-systolic click that followed by a murmur. That is why it is called a mid-systolic click murmur syndrome. Okay. And whenever you say the murmur of TR, you are supposed to mention regarding the Carvalho sign. You know what is Carvalho sign?
Oh yes, sir. Yes, sir. The during inspiration, right-sided murmurs will increase in intensity.
Yeah, that is what defines TR. So if you say it is TR, you have to mention regarding the Carvalho sign. Okay, so regarding the rheumatic heart disease, if you are hearing a case of early diastolic murmurs in the aortic area, you are supposed to mention in the aortic area or in the herbs area.
Herbs areas.
Why is that?
The reason I'm not sure, sir.
No, that's what that is a mistake that we commonly tend to do. What you said was correct. Rheumatic heart disease, you are supposed to mention it in the herbs area because the herbs area will involve the valve leaflet, whereas in the aortic area it is the root involved. Okay, so in syphilis and all, your root involvement. So when if we say it is a case of rheumatic AR, you are supposed to mention it is in the herbs area. It is much more commonly heard. Okay, so never forget that. And do you know what are the stages of valvular heart disease?
No.
No, just like that, just everything I will have 4 stages. At risk of valvular heart disease, asymptomatic, symptomatic severe MS. Just a minute. It will have 4 stages. Okay, the patient will have at risk, asymptomatic, and symptomatic severe. Okay, so those are the stages. And if anyone wants to add some points, it's fine. Otherwise, I'll just regarding the murmurs, I just have one suggestion for you. Second year, you have first years and second years, you have to practice it by hearing. That is what I can say. Timing the murmur is actually a little bit of very difficult thing when you have 1 or 2 murmurs along with it. So you will have to get acknowledged with the sound of the murmurs and the intensity of the murmurs. Okay. And I'll just, if anyone wants to add theory. Anyone else? So I'll just finish it off with this murmur video. Okay. I hope everyone can hear, right?
No, sir, it's not audible.
Not audible. So now,
Murmurs. Here you go. Go ahead and put in your headphones for a second, because I really want you to get the full effect of these murmurs. Here you go. So that was pretty much a whirlwind of 5 pretty common murmurs and some extra hard sounds. And so if that really confused you, that's okay. We're going to go through all the mechanisms of these murmurs, and I'm going to have you understanding it in no time. So as a quick review, we have S1 and S2. And I'm going to write S1 over here again, because remember this is a cycle. And so in between S1 and S2, we have systole. And between S2 and S1, we have diastole. And if you remember, the S1 and the S2 are actually caused by closing of the valves. For S1, specifically the closing of the mitral and the tricuspid. For S2, specifically the closing of the aortic and pulmonic valves. And these are all abbreviated here. Now, murmurs can occur between S1 and S2, and these would be systolic murmurs. And these would be things like aortic stenosis or pulmonic stenosis, mitral regurgitation, or tricuspid regurgitation. And one other thing that doesn't necessarily cause a murmur, but can be accompanied by mitral regurgitation, would be something like mitral valve prolapse. And so the ones that we're going to talk about today are going to be the left-sided valvular conditions, so the aortic stenosis and the mitral regurgitation, as well as the mitral valve prolapse. And I just realized that I made that prolap, and so we're going to fix that. Now for diastolic murmurs, meaning they occur between S2 and S1, these are going to be aortic regurgitation or pulmonic regurgitation, and mitral stenosis and tricuspid stenosis. And remember, the only way I'm arriving at these names and when these murmurs occur is based on which valves should be open or which valves should be closed. And we're doing this because the left-sided valve problems are generally much more common than the right-sided valve problems. So now that we've kind of categorized these into systolic or diastolic murmurs, 2 questions that are going to become important are, where do you hear the murmur most loudly? And what's the shape of the murmur? And we're going to explain these as we go through each murmur. So since location is a pretty big concept, I want to go over the 4 places that we auscultate or listen with our stethoscope. So one of them is here. You'll see I'm coloring this in. And this is in the second space in between ribs, also known as the second intercostal space, and this is the aortic area. This is also called the right upper sternal border. On the other side, in the same intercostal space or space in between ribs, we have the pulmonic area. And this is all space, but in intercostal space, this is the valve in question. So let's talk about aortic stenosis. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the progression of this murmur from S1 to S2. One is the closing of this mitral valve. And so let's say that this is closed. And so that closing is going to cause what we hear as S1. Now when that closes, the heart actually begins to contract, but it's contracting against a closed aortic valve. And so this valve at this point is closed. And so that's the reason that an aortic stenosis murmur actually doesn't start with S1. There's actually a small time period, small meaning like milliseconds, in between the closing of the mitral valve and when the aortic valve actually opens. And remember, what gives us that murmur is turbulent flow through the aortic valve. And so when the heart starts contracting and builds up enough pressure to open up this valve, the leaflets of the valve will kind of accelerate upwards. And when they finally pop open, remember they're not opening all the way because the valve for some reason is stenotic, then this will first give you what's called an ejection sound or an ejection click, and that's here, and we're going to label that EC for ejection click, and that's caused by these valve leaflets moving up really quick and then stopping really quick and shooting open. And so when the valve first opens, you're going to get a little bit of blood flow through this valve. And as the heart continues to contract more and more, as shown by these arrows, squeezing out more and more forcefully, you get more and more flow. And then eventually, as the heart starts to relax a little bit, and we're going to now get rid of these arrows, you're going to get less and less flow. And so the way that this murmur actually looks, the shape of the murmur, is that, like we said, as it contracts more forcefully, you get more and more flow, and the murmur becomes more and more intense. And then as the ventricle starts relaxing, it becomes less and less intense. And so we call this a crescendo, decrescendo murmur. And you'll also hear people call this or refer to this as a diamond-shaped murmur, and you can kind of see that around out of the aorta. And it can often have an ejection click, carotids. And the reason for that is that this murmur is occurring in, for all the other murmurs that we go through, pulmonic stenosis, which is really just the same, not going to radiate to the neck or the carotids. And instead of being heard in the aortic area, it's normally heard in the pulmonic area. So the next murmur, or apex, this murmur is actually what we call closing of the mitral valve. And that closing occurs because the pressure in the ventricle, this P here, is greater than the pressure in the atrium, this small p here. And so normally, this valve would close, and that would give you your S1. And in addition, you have your closed aortic valve here. But instead of closing, remember we're talking about mitral regurgitation. And so this is a closing problem. And so as the pressure starts to build in this left ventricle, but still with the aortic valve closed, blood is actually getting through this valve. And so that's going to cause a murmur right when S1 occurs. So right as that valve tries to close, it doesn't close fully, and because the pressure is higher in the left ventricle than the left atrium, you actually start that murmur right at S1. Now as soon as the heart begins to eject blood, this aortic valve opens right up and blood comes out this way. But because the pressure remains higher in this ventricle than the atrium the whole time, you actually get flow through this regurgitant valve throughout the entire cycle. And you would think naturally that as the heart contracts harder, that maybe this pressure would become bigger. And the truth is that the pressure actually does become bigger, but in chronic mitral regurgitation, which is what we're talking about, the atrium actually gets bigger or dilates. And so by doing this, it becomes more compliant. And what that means is that it can accept the blood that's coming back into it at a lower pressure, so it can accept more volume at a lower pressure. And as a result, that pressure in the atrium does not go up so much. But because the pressure difference between the left ventricle, which is really high, remember that's the workforce of the body, and the left atrium, which is pretty low because it's just receiving blood from the lung intensity, and it occurs all the way until the second heart sound, pansystolic murmur. In addition, it's also referred to as a flat murmur because the intensity does not change. And this murmur will actually radiate to the axilla. And so if you picture this valve kind of sitting in this general area somewhere, when blood flow goes back the other way, it's going to kind of be forced in the direction of this guy's armpit over here. Now again, just to mention the right-sided valve problem, tricuspid regurgitation, you have the same murmur, a holosystolic flat murmur, but in that case, you would hear it in the tricuspid area, and that murmur wouldn't radiate to the axilla because the valve is in a different position.
So that is. Start hearing those murmurs, guys. We'll finish it off. Thank you.